Good morning, Robin. Kyiv is on edge. We woke up to the sound of several loud bangs at just after 8 a.m. Smoke rising from the city centre. This is a busy intersection, you know, where hundreds of cars pass through during rush hour. And as far as we know, there were no military targets here. You know, there were attacks on infrastructure in Kyiv as well, but also civilian areas with no apparent strategic or military significance, including a park and a pedestrian bridge that has no other purpose other than sightseeing. This is the biggest attack on the capital since the beginning of the war, and the first attack on the city centre, making this a clear escalation. And as you say, Putin saying he personally ordered these strikes.
This is straight up terrorism. When Putin says, oh, well, you know, what goes around comes around, you shouldn't have blew up our bridge. And I saw plenty of people saying, well, that's technically infrastructure. It's valid to blow that up. Ultimately, it goes back to who struck the first blow. And the country that struck the first blow is still Vladimir Putin, is still Russia. So what ended up happening is, regardless, state-sponsored terrorism in the form of state war, military action, started when Vladimir Putin decided to invade Ukraine. What Ukraine did in blowing up the Crimean bridge was also a ridiculous act of war. I don't care if you get mad at me for saying this. Blowing up civilian infrastructure that civilians utilize because military equipment passed through it. The bridge was used for Russian military sources. I know there are a lot of civilian targets and civilian infrastructure that oftentimes are valid targets. There's rules to war. I think what Russia did in Western Ukraine is worse than what Ukraine did in Crimea. But I still think that what Ukraine did in Crimea is bad. Of course, what Russia is doing is significantly worse. What Russia has been doing since day one is significantly worse because they are the ones who are invading. None of this would happen if they hadn't invaded. This is why my main point has always been, this is why war is awful across the board. Because civilians end up getting killed in the process. I can't sit here and fucking act like, bombing civilian targets and civilian infrastructure is ultimately a good thing and justifiable. You know what I mean? Like, that's crazy. The main perpetrators of the circumstance are, of course, the Russian forces and Vladimir Putin. I don't think anyone has an issue with that take. I mean, or if you do, you're a fucking psycho. You're out of your mind.
And as has been the case in many major cities across Ukraine, these strikes have not targeted military sites. They've targeted civilian sites, things like power plants and water facilities. This seems to be Putin's response to the attack in Crimea, collective punishment to the entire Ukrainian population for what happened there.
This morning, Russia launching multiple attacks across Ukraine. The capital, Kyiv, coming under the most intense bombardment since the war began. At least 4 districts were hit. Russia deliberately targeting utilities, power plants and water supplies. But also civilian sites have been hit and many people now hiding in shelters across Ukraine.
You really can't just say whatever you want to say is terrorism. I mean, what kind of precedent does that set? Terrorism designation across the board is a political one that is utilized by state actors to make non-state actors or even sometimes state actors that are their enemies to come across like they're doing something, extra illegal. Right? Not just like regular illegal, but extra illegal. People do play with that distinction quite frequently. It's fucked up across the board, but the Western framing of the situation is pure propaganda. Russia's also playing the same game, and this was a PR dub for Putin and Russia, unfortunately. I mean, it's disgusting. It's incredibly fucked up. And I think this will escalate potentially into nuclear conflict, or at least that's what the American State Department's assessment is. Joe Biden has said we are closer to nuclear Armageddon since the Cuban Missile Crisis on Friday. The only way out of this is a treaty, okay? Is a ceasefire, is a treaty. There's no other way out of this. And it comes either after a nuclear attack or before a nuclear attack, or Ukrainian forces end up pushing and purging all land of Ukraine, ridding all Ukrainian land of Russian forces, okay, without Putin somehow using a tactical nuke and going full scale all out. But no matter what happens, there is still a peace treaty at the end of this. There has to be. That's how wars end. My Ukrainian mom and grandma are optimistic that somehow Ukraine will win. I don't see a win in this scenario for Ukraine. I mean, there is no win. There is no winners in war. Everybody loses. But when I say everybody, I mean workers, civilians. Every fucking civilian loses. You understand? That's who loses in this process. Those who make out like a fucking bandit are weapons manufacturers, oligarchs on either side. You know what I mean? You know who wins in this war? America wins. The UK wins, but not really. Like even American and British citizens don't even win in that circumstance, right? It's just the weapons manufacturers win. And ultimately, the people that are losing the most out of everyone are Ukrainian civilians. They are the ones who are getting fucked.
And in the aftermath, Putin also appointing a new general to oversee the war in Ukraine, Army General Sergei Surovikin, known as the Butcher in Syria for his role as the commander there at the time of the Aleppo mass bombardment. Now, mounting fears of Putin's next move.
You have a modern nuclear power and the leader of that modern nuclear power.
John Kirby's statements on this shit is why I'm fucking terrified. John Kirby has been going on every fucking news broadcast and talking about the possibility of maybe a baby nuke being used. I can't help but feel like they know something that we don't, as always, where they're basically stating, you know, maybe a nuke might go off, maybe a tactical nuke might go off, but like, you know, it's just a little baby nuke, which is fucking insane. Are they gearing us up for a potential Russian nuke being launched, like a tactical nuke or something, so that they could be like, yeah, we knew about it ahead of time, we told you. But it's still a fucking nuke. It's still a nuke. Thousands will die. And they even have said that like they would potentially blow up the fleet, like the Russian fleet in the Black Sea. They will attack it if a nuke does go off. But beyond that, they don't necessarily have any kind of like additional defense measures in place. Obviously, you can't speak on it so openly, but that's part of the reason why I'm worried about the parts that they are speaking out on. Wouldn't both sides launch all their nukes immediately if Russia just sent this one? No. With what John Kirby and the like are saying, makes it unironically seem like if Russia were to launch a tactical nuke into Ukrainian territory, that they would not retaliate by launching they wouldn't activate mutually assured self-destruction. That Ukraine is not in NATO and therefore not considered a large enough risk for mutually assured destruction to kick in. That's what I'm fucking terrified by. And I don't know why people don't see that. I don't know why Ukrainian leadership does not recognize that that's what Americans are kind of gearing everybody for, kind of conditioning everybody for. The way I see it, I think what people are looking forward to, like what the American side and the Western side is looking forward to, is like if Russia overextends its hand, China will stop its allegiance with Russia. And I think that they're wrong on that assessment, but what do I know? I've been wrong before. And I certainly am not an expert on, Chinese diplomacy. Gamble that Western powers are engaging in here is that if Russia overextends and like does something that is truly horrific, like launching in the words of the American State Department, a baby nuke, which is still a fucking nuke, which is still immensely destructive, that will cut off Russia's ties with even maybe some of the OPEC plus allegiance that they have, which is doubtful. Or at the very least, China's involvement on the Russian side. The precedent for tactical weapons having many times higher collateral civilian death than the actual targets is already well established. There is no such thing as a tactical nuke. The whole point is mass casualties. Yes, I understand that. And from what I understand, nuclear technology is so goddamn insane and so fucking powerful that like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the atomic bombs look tiny in comparison, which is insane to say. This notion that we're having conversations about like whether or not we could survive nuclear Armageddon or nuclear Holocaust or nuclear winter is insane. It is dark. 1 kiloton to 3 kiloton tactical nuke bombs are smaller than Nagasaki. Doesn't Putin get bumped the second he decides to use a nuke by his own general staff maybe? These are all super old conversations that people had during the Cold War when there was the original nuke scare, you know? And you can't rely on that. You can't make policy around like hoping that someone will fucking off the leader before they hit the button. Like I've heard this so many fucking times. If you've read anything about mutually assured destruction, you've heard people say that. You've heard people talk about those like hypothetical scenarios. And relying on that Hail Mary in a situation where nukes are flying is a little wild. I'll just say it like that. I don't know if I'm willing to bet on that. You know, there's actually no point in today's attacks. It's terrorism, sure, but it doesn't get anyone in Ukraine. People are used to all of it. Bro, it doesn't matter. It's still horrific. What the fuck do you mean? Ukrainians in my chat are like, bro, it's fine. 12 people died. That's crazy. I mean, I'm sorry that like you're used to ongoing terror in your life, but no, striking especially Western Ukrainian targets is fucking psychotic. It is completely unacceptable. That's terrorism. They hit civilian infrastructure to say, hey, you hit our civilian infrastructure, we're going to hit your civilian infrastructure even worse. That's what they did. That was that. That was the main reason why Russia did this, and they openly stated it as such, and it's completely unacceptable. People have unironically gotten used to it in Ukraine at this point. My uncle was on the phone and a bomb struck nearby. He just calmly said, oh, bomb, I'll be right back. The goal or the purpose of these Russian targets, like Russia targeting Western Ukraine, is to strike fear and destabilize Ukrainian civilian population life. Because as far as I understand, regardless of how traumatic that existence has been, Ukraine is, by and large, on the Western side, gone back to business as usual. Obviously not fully business as usual. You could never do that while you were actively being invaded by a foreign force. It is to basically disrupt it. That's terrorism. That's the goal of terrorism. The goal of terrorism is to strike fear in the hearts of your opponent and disrupt your opponent's daily existence, the opposing nation. So they can no longer survive, and it's destabilizing. Morale bombing has been shown to be counterproductive, and we've known this as World War II. I mean, it basically reignites and regalvanizes the Ukrainian civilian population in the exact opposite way. The world is already looking at Russia as the main villains, as they should, because they are the main villains in this circumstance. I think that I don't know what the delivery mechanism for these missiles were, but the idea that they are basically stating, like, we can strike you at the heart of where all of your citizens live, while simultaneously talking about tactical nukes or, moving nukes around potentially, or using nukes as Putin has done, while the American State Department on media is routinely referencing potential nuclear weapons being used as a way to like almost, get everybody on board that it might happen. I find that terrifying, a terrifying prospect for Ukrainians currently. Putin did it to please Russian hawks and his elites and among his supporters. Yeah, I mean, Putin did it as a strongman game. I mean, you can see here insane footage of the Russian cruise missile hitting Kyiv today. That's the first one, and then the second one comes in right after here. Fucking terrifying, dude. Insane. Like, look at this shit. There's people just fucking driving around, you know what I mean? That's insane. Russians are destroying my city. There are explosions in Kyiv and other cities in Ukraine. Holy fuck, this one blows up right behind her. I walked past this building for many years. That's fucking nuts. There's two ways out of every conflict, okay? Even if it's police violence on the fucking ground, all the way to state violence and military violence, okay? State violence, like what Russia is conducting. You either escalate or you de-escalate. If you de-escalate and you move towards a treaty, especially when you're making big gains on the Eastern Front, you can try your best to try and come to terms with Putin, which it does not seem like Ukraine is interested in doing. And you can make legitimate arguments as to why they can't. How could you trust Russia? But ultimately, all state actors that are involved in this, and I mean Western actors as well, and China, need to come to the table all together and put an end to this. Medvedev said today that the goal was still to change the regime in Kyiv. Russians aren't interested in a negotiated settlement still. Absolutely. That's bullshit. That's completely unacceptable. But there's no other solution out of this, which is why I'm saying the pressure should be applied by the states that are involved on the opposing sides. On the one side, you have China. On the other side, you have the United States and the UK. And if America's expectation on their side is to just wait it out and see what Russia does, and that is going to lead to tremendously more civilian casualties, before they actually get China on board to put more stress and apply more pressure on the Russian side. And even then, it's not a guarantee that China will do that. On Medvedev's statement, let's see this. The Russian officials continue to state publicly that they are still pursuing regime change and other maximalist objectives. Worth keeping in mind when people tell Kyiv they need to look for a negotiated settlement, Russian officials aren't signaling that they're looking for a compromise. Why China will hurt their ally? What do you mean? Because war is not good for Anyone but weapons manufacturers. That's it. This war in Ukraine specifically is bad for a lot of trade partners in the third world that China works with, that the United States also works with as well, because of grain and because of energy prices in EU and whatnot. It hurts the global economy. And in turn, it hurts people living in these countries that are energy partners. Also discussing about nukes so casually, that too by one of the great powers is a huge problem. There have been active conflicts in nuclear-armed countries even in recent years, and they have been way more careful. Even they'll mention the word nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, Putin's dropping the N-word left and right. Please, let's not do that. Let's not do the Trump thing and say the N-word when talking about nukes. Good clip on how Russian TV is covering today's missile attacks. Russian state TV showcases the latest strikes against Ukraine, seamlessly incorporating Donald Trump, Mike Pompeo, Elon Musk into their war propaganda. As long as in negotiations, it's being stated all along that Moscow seeks nothing less than Ukraine's unconditional capitulation. For the record, this is exactly the same shit that this is in the same line as like Zelensky also saying it. Both sides are getting trying to harden their stance and trying to escalate rather than try to de-escalate. Obviously, Russia is still in the wrong here. Do not understand. Because tomorrow, Russia could be like, okay, we're done. We're no longer fucking doing this. Okay? We're no longer doing this. Here's the reality. If Ukraine said tomorrow, we're no longer going to fight, let's do a peace treaty, there is no guarantee that Russia would fucking stop. But if Russia says, yes, tomorrow we're actually stopping this, we're actually stopping the war, let's do a peace treaty, Ukraine has to fucking capitulate to that. They have to. They have less power overall in this circumstance, regardless of the military victories that they've made in the Eastern Front. They have to. So still, Russia does maintain that power. Not on Russia's terms, though. No, I mean, not on Russia's terms, but Russia calling for a ceasefire is still significantly more powerful than Ukraine calling for one. Even if Ukraine was interested in a ceasefire, I don't know if the United States and UK, like their Western allies, would be totally on board with that. Well, now Russia considers all those new regions besides Donbass as their own territory, so they can't really give them away according to their constitution. It's against the law to surrender Russian territory. I know. What are some of the odds some sort of coup and Russia continues to lose ground? I don't know. I have no idea. I think Russia has more power in ending the war than Ukraine does. That's one. I think the United States even has more of a say in the actions of Ukraine, because without NATO weapons, Ukraine would not be able to put up a strong front. I think that much is established here. And therefore, because the Western powers recognize their involvement in this matter, they're not working towards de-escalation, because it's not their people dying, it's Ukrainians dying. Ukrainians, on the other hand, absolutely have a valid right to emancipation, a valid need for freedom from Russian involvement and Russian invasion in their country. On the other hand, you also have a final actor, China, which is Russia's ally. But all China can do is potentially stress Russia, especially if Russia overextends and ends up using like a nuke or something. But waiting on Russia to overextend would tremendously increase the number of Ukrainian casualties. Does your argument not reduce to let Ukraine fight but don't help them? No, absolutely not. My argument is be honest about your level of involvement with Ukraine and openly state that you are willing and able to try and bring Russia to the negotiations table. What you guys are not, I don't know why, refuse to recognize is that there are limitations to the help that America gives to Ukraine. There are limitations to how much they'll help Ukraine, because they do not want American state action going up against Russian state action to avoid nuclear fallout. Complete nuclear holocaust. If stupidly Russia uses a nuke, then NATO would destroy the Russian conventional forces outside of Russia, effectively starting World War III. Yeah, I agree with most of your analysis on Ukraine, but I do think that it seems as though the Biden admin, UK still wants to go hard, trust is insane, is at least signaling that they want to keep the war limited, such as calling out Ukraine for killing Dugin. It seems like they're seriously concerned about nuclear war, but maybe too little too late. I don't think they are. It was shocking that the New York Times wrote about how the American State Department called out Ukrainian actors for the assassination of Dugin's daughter. That was really, truly, truly strange. But that's a tiny sliver of a fucking olive branch in a sea of routinely playing a role in escalating conflict. How long do you think Ukraine could keep this up? I heard the World Bank predicted Ukraine GDP fell by 40% this year. I heard it was 30% first of all, and that is actually like kind of wild. That is not as bad as I thought it would be. China has been ambiguous regarding their current position on this matter. Their position currently is that they understand the interests and concerns of Russia, but have questions about the war, which they reiterated even in their recent SCO summit. Other countries have started turning on them slowly. Modi, is in his meeting with Putin at SCO, said, "This is not the age of war," which is a much stronger rhetoric than before. Yeah. Isn't Ukraine the one side that says there will be no negotiations, or is that just Russian propaganda? I mean, Ukraine has said that. Zelensky said that there would be no negotiations until there's regime change in Russia. But I think they're just trying to strongman. You know what I mean? I think he's just trying to strongman and come across like a leader that is under fire and under attack and create, I don't know, some level of oppose some level of strength, like show some level of strength against the invading force, and to say, look, we're still in this, you know, fuck these guys, especially because it came off the heels of gigantic victories in Kherson.
Does anything change today in terms of the Ukrainian arguments to the U.S. and other NATO countries in terms of their requests for weapons? Does this move the needle on some of those bigger systems that they've been asking for repeatedly? It
doesn't matter if they want to sell the Iron Dome to Ukraine, by the way. You know who doesn't want to sell the Iron Dome to Ukraine? Israel, motherfucker. What do you mean? This wasn't the first time that they brought this up. I think a lot of people forget that, like, Israel's a trade partner with Russia as well as Ukraine. They were not a fan of that. This is not the first time that they brought up the Iron Dome conversation.
The pressure is going to continue to really weigh down on the Kherson and the eastern campaigns. There may very well be another attack through the center, through Zaporozhye. But the only thing he could do in response is not on the military battlefield. He could terrorize the population. He could make it a miserable winter for the population. And he has a limited means to do that. He has a dwindling supply of cruise missiles. He now has these Iranian drones. Those are actually much, much easier to defeat. The cruise missiles fly faster. They have a difficult profile to potentially defeat.
I mean, these guys have like personally played a role in doing exactly what they're talking about here with disdain with respect to, like, you know, countries that are overwhelmingly brown, right? Like, we all recognize that. I think that's not new. It's not even a unique take. And for those of you who are new here, I like to sometimes, bring America into the equation with respect to this, specifically so that people who otherwise do not recognize America's involvement in other countries as an overall bad thing, to finally recognize that it actually is. Iraq comes to mind immediately, or Afghanistan, but certainly Iraq.
Talk about this new commander. Nick Payton Walsh was mentioning this new commander that he has in place. Are you seeing a new approach?
I do not think there's going to be a new approach, because he's incapable of really doing a new approach. As long as the Russian army is what it is, which is a terrible army. I mean, now this guy is a hard dude, okay? He's responsible for the bombing in Aleppo. He served down, in Syria, conducted operations. He's been jailed twice. I mean, he's an interesting character, but he's a hardliner. And again, this is a way to appease the hardliners that Vladimir Putin has surrounded himself.
God damn, bro. They got the most thumb-like looking motherfucker up here, dude. They found King Thumb, Thumbellini.